So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Sorry, we're getting a little bit of a late start. We had some technical difficulty, and it's so interesting. I want to share this story because oftentimes when we are trying to do something important, it could be a halaqa, it could be even like trying to finish editing an article or doing something that's important, we often have what now we call double attacks. And it's like it doesn't happen at any other time. And it could be something as crazy as, like, this has happened before, like with this camera. Once the professor was giving a really important khutbah, and I could not for the life of me get it to focus, because it's autofocus, and it's like a brand new camera. So if you go back onto our YouTube site, you'll see there's like one recording that says, sorry for the lack of focus. And someone actually chewed me out, saying, well, the least you could do is buy like a second camera in case this happens. And so I thought, oh my God, should I actually do that? But the next time it happened, it actually was doing that same thing where it was not focusing. I took it and I gave it to the professor and pray on this. And he did it, and it actually started working. Okay, so I take it as a good sign that we had technical difficulty today. I hope that means that we're going to do important things and talk about important things today. And actually, it's really good for me too. I have to apologize in advance because I've been up since 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I'm a little bit I apologize because usually, when I am sleep deprived, I have no filter. And whatever filter I do have normally is already very thin and often doesn't work. So if I say anything that's inappropriate or that's a little bit too heated or emotional, then you'll understand why. And I have my notes too because I'm worried that I'm going to go, oh my God, I forgot exactly what I'm going to say. But anyway, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and welcome, and I hope that everyone had a wonderful Eid, and we had a really nice Eid. We actually spent, I think if you follow what we do, we have a lot of recordings online, so we were actually at a number of protests. The professor was speaking outside the Saudi consulate in support of the Saudi scholars who have been tortured and imprisoned, and some have now received death sentences. And so actually what I wanted to announce, which is actually very exciting, is that next week we're going to have an event where the professor will be in conversation with the son of Salman al-Oda, who is one of the scholars, very prominent Saudi scholars who has 20 million followers online and stuff. But anyway, his son is going to come, Abdullah, and join us, and they're going to have a conversation about just what's happening. So we're excited about that. And of course, we wish we could meet on a better occasion, but I think it's really important that we have the opportunity to talk about what's happening, because I think people have been very quiet about the events out there. We also
should bring people so we can film.
Yes, so we've invited a number of Muslim organizations and people and stuff like that. But if anybody's in the Los Angeles area and wants to join us, then please email me so we can definitely increase the invitation for that. And then the next day we actually went to a protest for what's happening in Syria in Idlib, and we were outside the CNN building in Hollywood, and again the professor spoke about that issue as well, so you can find all of that stuff online. And then we had a number of really wonderful spiritual events. So the professor spoke at Khaled Abou El Fadl at the Islamic Center, and then right afterwards we drove to a midnight spiritual night at the Islamic Center of Southern California, where he gave what I thought was an amazing, one of his best talks on spiritual elevation, where it was personal and it was poignant and it was very inspiring. So I really encourage you to watch that. And we had a number of very fiery khutbahs. So, but the thing that was also very special that we did this Ramadan, which I've actually never really done before, is a group dhikr session where we came here and we got together, and I've been 25 years a Muslim, and the first time I actually did a dhikr session was last year. We did it as part of our family. We would just kind of do it, just Sharif and Sharif and the professor and I. And this year was the first time that we actually brought other people. And the funny story is I discovered that the professor sort of said to me, well, I've never really wanted to do a dhikr session because I know that you would ask way too many questions. It would be a huge headache. So, because I tend to ask a gazillion questions about all kinds of things, and so early on in our marriage, I actually got a question quota. So we reached the age where I could ask 2 more questions. Because for us, you can imagine, when you're in the company of somebody who is just so learned and so wonderful, it's like you just want to ask every question that your heart has. But if you, are seeing from the professor's perspective, it's like everyone you encounter wants to ask you a question. And it gets very exhausting, and you know your energy is limited, and you know from being here that there's no such thing as sort of a quick answer to a question, right? You ask a question, you get the history, the context, the background, the nuance, the different opinions, you know, and then finally that. So, you know, every question takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So I kind of say this as sort of like a, you know, please be aware that when you do ask questions, because I learned this the hard way, when you are ready to ask a question of the professor, you know, take the time to think it out, because, you know, and do your homework and ask something that is important, because I always worry that maybe God has said, you know, you have, professor, a quota of questions that you will answer before you leave this planet, and so I want to make sure that every single question he answers is actually something that I can capture, you know, in recording and uploading so others can benefit too. So anyway, just a side note. But the dhikr session was really amazing and beautiful, and so I think he agreed to do it because it's like, okay, I'll do the introductory explanation and kind of take everyone through whatever questions I might have. So it's like, it's like a shared group. So anyway, but dhikr, for people who don't know what dhikr is, because I didn't actually know exactly what it was, it's when a group of people come together and they recite and repeat beautiful prayers in hopes of like capturing the attention of God for amplified blessings. And so the thing that I thought was really beautiful or that I learned that was very beautiful, is that there is a power in reciting those words in Arabic, and that when you get a group of people together, that you really amplify that power. So it's, even if you don't know what the Arabic means, and just by association of being in this group, that you get kind of blessings by association. And on top of that, when you have someone like the professor who's leading the dhikr, someone at that high station with God, you get those extra blessings just by being there too. So that's a lesson in, if you're going to do dhikr, make sure you have someone who's at a high station with God, so you kind of get those extra blessings. But it was actually, so it was really a beautiful and a new experience for me. And like so many things, like new experiences kind of come with a lot of joy and elation, but also a little bit of anxiety and nervousness, because it was like, a new thing. And, it was interesting because it made me kind of think back to my early days as, a convert, when everything was sort of new and you're kind of learning everything, and you're a little bit anxious and a little bit, worried about doing things. And, it made me kind of rethink sort of my relationship with things like the Arabic language and the things that I learned as a convert. And it also sparked in me kind of a reevaluation of like a lot of the messages that or the understandings or perhaps misunderstandings that that I learned from the Muslim community early in my days as a convert. So these are things that, upon reflection, I was like, I really want to kind of rethink about my experience and my journey. Because, the professor, especially recently, has been talking a lot about all the things happening in the world. Muslims are in a bad place. The constant question is, okay, what can I do to make a difference? Like, what is my particular role in, trying to affect change? And so even things like, when I was a convert, of course you have to learn Arabic so you understand, how to do your prayers. And, converts often ask, like, well, do I need to do my prayers in Arabic, or can I do them in English? And then you also learn things like, well, it's really good to learn Arabic if you can. You should try to memorize as many surahs as you can. You should try to learn these sorts of things. And what's interesting is, like, thinking back on that, some of like the messaging that was given to me was kind of like, okay, as a matter of piety and as a matter of being a good Muslim, these are the sort of the things that you have to do. So one of them was sort of like Arabic. And, in that pool of things, too, are like, as a woman, of course, well, you have to wear hijab. So it's kind of like, if you don't wear hijab, you're not as good of a Muslim. And that, I've talked about my experience or my thinking about hijab and other halaqas, so I don't really want to, open that can of worms. But just to say that, as an example, I think one of the biggest disservices that the Muslim community has done for Muslim women in particular, and converts in particular, is, this idea that piety is connected to whether or not you wear hijab. So that's, one of those things that I would question. And the other thing, like in that kind of pool of things that I was thinking about, like in my early days as a convert, is, just sort of like the appearance of, like, when you become a Muslim, what are the things that you should adopt to become a better Muslim? And, one of them is kind of like, for men, like, what do you wear? Like or I mean, actually not even just men, but men and women. Like the idea of, okay, you're a convert who grew up in America, you have no association to anything really Arab, Pakistani, Indonesian, whatever. And all of a sudden you convert and you're wearing, Arab clothing, or you're wearing Pakistani clothing. And, part of the reason why I bring these things up is like when you're a convert, I think that you are, very eager to, understand like, okay, how do I be a good Muslim? How do I make sure that I do everything right? And you know so little that you really don't have a whole lot of discernment. But, these, I always kind of like was struck with this feeling of, the same feeling I had when I entered the dhikr, which is kind of like, I feel like I'm late to the party. Like, converts sort of feel like they show up, they're late to the party because everyone else has been there, everyone knows what's going on, and you're kind of clueless, and you're like, okay, maybe I should know how to do this. And maybe and I don't really know how to do this. So I think that's probably, like the dhikr kind of made me feel like, okay, I was not familiar with like the things that I'm supposed to be doing. So let me take a step back and say, so what we were doing at the dhikr, you start out, and you can actually see the recording online. We started out by reciting things that were familiar to me. So things like Al-Fatiha, so I know Al-Fatiha, and I can say that no problem. Then Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, and Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq. And so as we're doing this as a group, it's like, okay, I'm in my zone. I feel powerful, I know what I'm doing, this is great. And then we moved into sort of the things that I didn't know. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I don't know Arabic, and I haven't really spent a lot of time learning, some of these other, like, dua or other things. And it, like, kind of triggered this idea of, oh my God, I'm late to the party. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know if this is, like, if I've done something wrong by not spending more time doing this. And that was sort of a humbling experience. So, again, so this opened up this whole idea of, okay, so what is it that's really, important for us to know as Muslims, and especially as we are moving forward. So, as a convert, you in the early days, you become very susceptible to what people tell you should do. And then on top of that, that idea of I want to do what's right, those things sort of make you, very anxious to kind of, adopt everything and not really know, like, what is going to make a difference and what's not going to make a difference. So, I like the fact that, like, what I really admire people who have taken the time to learn Arabic. So, like, definitely the first message you get is you should try to do everything you can to learn Arabic. But despite, like, in my case, I never, unfortunately, learned Arabic. And despite, all intentions and, I just couldn't pull it together. I didn't have the wherewithal to make it happen. But I really admire, those people who take the time and really do the hard work and learn the language. And so, for that, I feel like, envious at times. But the thing that I notice that oftentimes converts do, like when they haven't taken the time to really learn and master the language, is they start using Arabic in sort of like Arabic word dropping way. So, like they'll, instead of saying, like, this is good for my faith, they'll say, this is good for my deen. Or they'll say, oh, this is good for your iman. Or, they might say, oh, in the dunya, instead of saying, well, in this world, or in the akhirah, in the hereafter. And, it's one of these sort of like irritating kind of things that people do, because especially as a non-Arabic speaker, I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I don't think you get brownie points just for throwing in Arabic words here and there. And, and for me, like, as an English-speaking person, it's, like, really important to me that I understand, like, what the Arabic is. So if people have sort of been following, like, the professor and, like, his, the way he talks and stuff, they may have noticed that I kind of insist on, please, if you are saying, are you going to say anything in Arabic, make sure that you translate. And I think, I'm really grateful that it's now sort of second nature now, that you'll notice that when he says something in Arabic, whether it's in a khutbah or a lecture, he really makes the point of, saying it in English. And so, so when I go back and I go, okay, I recognize now that, as much as I might have wanted to learn Arabic in the past, that I think I'm going to probably leave this planet not ever having mastered Arabic. So what actually does that mean for me as, a pious Muslim? And what does that mean, like, that feeling in dhikr of, oh my God, I don't know this Arabic, I don't know this, I don't know that. And then it's like, does that make me a lesser person? Does that make me a lesser Muslim? And it made me kind of step back and go, well, wait a minute, I don't think, obviously we know Islam is a message for humanity, and I don't think that God expected that, all the Muslims in the world, had to be proficient at learning a foreign language in order to benefit from the message to humanity. So, and I don't think that people should be made to feel lesser, like converts often do, if you don't learn Arabic. And so, again, it's so those kinds of things, so I started thinking, okay, so what is my place? What is my purpose? How do I add value in making a difference? Like back to this theme, how do I make a difference? So one is, I want to make sure, like the professor translates everything into English, but I also want to make sure that converts don't feel like they are lesser if they somehow, don't know Arabic. And third is that, to tell Muslims, please stop doing this Arabic word dropping, or name dropping. And, it's interesting because I don't think people, like converts, people don't realize like the messages that converts get, because when you're so like open to everything and you don't really know anything and you assume that, all born Muslims came to the party before you, so you're the latecomer and so you just kind of defer to them, that a lot of this can be very damaging. And like looking back now and looking at where we are as Muslims, you cannot help but feel that we have been kind of our own worst enemy. So when we like contribute to this notion of Islam being a very foreign religion, so for example, as converts, if you're wearing like Arabic, or Pakistani clothing, you go to your Eid prayers. Like I was always struck when we lived in Texas, we would go to Eid prayers, and like literally, you walk in and you just see like white people, and they're not, and I'm sorry, I don't mean this in a racist way, but it's kind of like converts and non-converts. It's just like this flurry of Arab clothing, and you go to any Islamic center and you see what they're selling in the stores, and it's like this, this underlying message that if you want to be Muslim, you have to look Arab or you have to look Pakistani. And I think that these are the types of things that we need to be smart about and think about, because our enemies are spending millions upon millions of dollars in the Islamophobic industry to convince non-Muslims that this is a foreign religion, that these people are not like us, they look different, we don't really understand their culture is not compatible with ours, and and that makes it very easy for them to dehumanize us as a people, and then target us, kill us, torture us, and you see that happening all around the world. And to build on some of the themes that Professor has talked about, it's like when we live in a place like America or in the West, anywhere, and we have the freedom to choose what we look like, how we sound, how we present ourselves as Muslims. It's a big responsibility. We really need to think about what we're conveying. When I was, just to tell you a story, when my first job out of college, I was a commercial real estate broker. So I was hired along with a bunch of sort of like young kids, fresh out of college, green around the ears, didn't know anything, but they were ready to train to be salespeople, and how do you be an effective salesperson. And I remember the very first thing that one of our bosses told us is, you have to understand that perception is reality, that whatever people perceive, that's the reality because that's what they see and that's what they believe. It doesn't matter that you're not as you appear to be. So this was really powerful because you think, for Muslims, if perception is reality, then what is the perception of Muslims? And oftentimes, and that's really problematic. So when we think about how do we make a difference, there are a couple of things that I would suggest. As far as, things like hijab, I understand that people get very testy about, you're taking away my right to express my religious identity. Well, first of all, I would argue that, I don't believe that the hijab is a universal, religious identity for women. Because, I understand, it's a call for modesty, and modesty is contextual. And, and it's like, I understand, you want to wear your scarf, you want to wear your burqa on the beach, but people are dying. And when people use that scarf as a means for, making you an other or a foreign entity, or, basically take it to their advantage to kill people and target people, we have to think about priorities. Okay, sure, it would be nice to wear a scarf, but you know, if it's used against us, maybe we should think about, you know, is this something that God actually really wanted for us to do? And how important is it when people are dying? You know, or when you wear your abaya and you wear your cap and you don't really have an association with it, but you like it. Again, it's very foreign. And we do have to care about how people perceive us, especially here, you know, in America when, you know, white nationalism is on the rise. And when we use language like, you know, the Arabic words that we throw here and there, again, it becomes very exclusionary for people who don't speak Arabic. And it almost makes you feel like, you know, even when you say like, salam, brother, salam, sister, people who don't know what salam means, you know, it could be kind of like a code word for, you know, the Muslim, you know, whatever. You could very easily just say peace, you know, hey, love you, whatever. It's not, you know, it's not that important that we follow something like that. To give you an example, and this was, I thought, very interesting piece of learning. People, and some of the people here may know this better than me, but the history of white nationalists in this country. You know, at one time they were really big on the, you know, KKK, the white robes, the hoods, the redneck look. You know, they had a particular perception about them or look about them. And somewhere along the line, someone was very smart and said, listen, let's think strategically about this. This is a turnoff. People are not responding well to white robes and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So from now on, we are going to adopt a very clean-cut look. And, you know, get rid of your tattoos, get rid of your weird haircuts, make yourself look normal, wear suits, look really nice. And now you can infiltrate the military, you can infiltrate the police, you can infiltrate the government, and they have. And look at where they are. And it's, you know, so it's food for thought. You know, like how important is it that we hold on to these like symbols of quote unquote Islamicity that I'm not even sure, you know, how it's defined. And what does it mean here in America? Like imagine if all of us were, you know, when every time we go to the mosque, we look, you know, very presentable. And I know people are going to say, well, you know, you're like selling out for the West. No, I think this is an issue of, you know, being in a situation where we have to think smart about how we're being persecuted and what tools are being used against us. So, just a thought. Did you want to say something?
We're Westerners.
We're Westerners.
I'm a Westerner.
Exactly.
What am I supposed
I mean,
to be?
that's exactly the point. You know, like I have no connection to a scarf. I have no connection to anything other than what I grew up with. But the very strong message, and I'm sure you got this too, Anthony,
Oh, yeah.
is that, you know, once you become a Muslim, you have to start adopting all of these sort of symbols of Islamicity. And I'm pushing back and I'm saying no. And because the cost now is simply too high. And the last thing is, you know, what's really interesting is, as a convert, you know, when you're learning about the religion, if you have the good benefit of like finding books that were written like in the early 19th century or before the onset of Wahhabism, you actually find decent books. So like the very first book that was very influential to me was called The Religion of Islam by an Ahmadi. His name was Maulana Muhammad Ali. And, you know, like he was, I think he was trained in Britain, you know, and so the book was beautiful. And it was written in English and it was very, you know, like interesting and smart and all of that. But fast forward, I mean, if I had been, you know, like, when I look at like what I see at the bookstores, you know, Islamic bookstores, and the pamphlets, and the language, and even the quality of all of that, and the language, the phraseology that people use to describe Islam, you know, it's almost as if, like, I get the distinct impression that we had a non-native speaker that came over and translated the Arabic, and used words that by now, are like not even in use anymore. But we, as like Native American speakers, adopted that and spread it. So things like, for example, okay, I don't even know how to say this word, viceregent, viceregent, you know?
Viceregent.
How do you say it? Okay.
Viceregent.
But something like what? It's a keeper, you know, of earth, right? Yeah. I mean,
someone who acts in the stead of somebody else.
Okay. So, you know, or even like, so why do we use that word? You know, we could use a descriptor. We are the gentle caretakers of, you know, the land of, you know, the creation of the divine being, you know, of God. I mean, you know, we use enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. Who enjoins anything? Does anyone know what enjoin means, right? I mean, you could say, like, you know, we encourage people, or I wrote something very eloquent when I had a little bit more sleep, so, We are cutting-edge masters of social justice and a faith dedicated to serving the most disempowered in our society. We call people to their conscience to perform acts of beauty, kindness, and grace, and we call people to resist the temptation of pursuing a path of darkness or evil. How does that sound as opposed to enjoying the good and forbidding evil? It's the same meaning, but it's like, we have not done a very good job of using the tools of our language to really convey the sophistication and the beauty of what we represent. So, what I'm calling for is just sort of like a rethinking of like, how do we present who we are and what we stand for? Like, I get really frustrated when people are like, oh, Christianity is, the faith of love. No, Islam is the faith of love, but we haven't actually conveyed that in our language. And language is an art, and language is power. And we have incredible writers, we have incredible artists, we have incredible people who, have all kinds of talents, and we don't use that. If you're a convert, for some reason, it's like the logical path is, okay, you start learning Arabic, you go overseas to, wherever, now you can go to Morocco or Jordan, you start learning texts because you're on a path to learn fiqh. So is every convert supposed to be like an expert in fiqh? No, it's like, it's like, it just doesn't make sense. So, ironic because here, we do this tafsir and we mine the meanings, right? So we go and we say, okay, here's sort of the flat line translation, then let's go to the next level and let's look at what these words could mean. And if it means this, then this is the nuance and the depth of meaning, and let's go to a third layer. And if it could mean this, then it could mean this whole number of things. And we go, oh my God, this is so beautiful. Well, what we need to do now is we need to reverse engineer that process. And we have to go, okay, what is the beauty of our message? And how do we then convey that in the best language, in the best, commercials, in the best, media, or whatever, use the tools that we have before us. Where people before might say, well, I wear my shirt, and I can hear my son going, hey, dude, I rock my t-shirt. It's like we have to use the language of our age and the language of, our culture, and not be afraid to do that. I mean, in the last story, which is kind of like, shortly after 9/11, the professor and I actually traveled here to Los Angeles, and we met with a bunch of Muslim leaders, and I'm not going to say who they are because people will know who they are. But I remember it was kind of like one of these strategy meetings, like, okay, what do we do? And this was like one of those, I don't know if people were old enough or around or whatever, but after 9/11, there was like this window of opportunity. There was like a gap of maybe a year, maybe 6 months, where the world was like, oh my God, the Twin Towers fell. Who are Muslims? We don't know anything about this religion. Who are they and why would they, what in their religion would allow this to happen? And people were listening with an open heart. And come on in. People were listening with an open heart and an open mind, and they genuinely wanted to understand, like, what is Islam and what is this about? But, what ended up happening is that window of opportunity closed, and the Islamophobes came in, and they saw the opportunity, they smelled blood, and then the rest of the story, the millions upon millions of investment in, the Islam is evil message. But back then, right after 9/11, when we were meeting with the Muslim leadership, I was working in a marketing company, and I came in and I said, listen, what we really need to do is, because they were spending money on things like, brochures and pamphlets and, like position papers and things like that. I'm like, no, we need to hire a PR firm. We need to have someone professionally manage the image of Muslims. And we need to think about things like commercials. We need to think about, messaging, billboards on buses or whatever, whatever tools we have before us. We need to use those things in a smart way. And they, they balked at the idea. They thought it was stupid. They thought, they didn't pursue it. And I always wonder, so this was back in the early 2000s, and here we are 2019, and how bad things have gotten. What if we had had a PR firm back then? What if we had done something about it back then? Where would we be today? But anyway, so, but it's never too late, inshallah. We have to start doing it because we understand that the walls are closing in. So to sum up, again, perception is reality. So we really need to think about countering that perception of foreignness, and and making sure that we use these tools to our benefit. Using Arabic or not using Arabic as a tool of exclusion, or as proof of piety. Unless you've actually mastered the language and you're fluent in it, then by all means, you're amazing and you should do that. But if you don't know Arabic, don't drop Arabic words as if that gets you anything. And lastly, reclaiming, reappropriating the language we use to talk about our faith, and using that power of language and power of presentation and communication. These are the things that, to me, on reflecting on all of these sorts of experiences that I had over Ramadan, these are the things that we can do to make a difference. So, you can check yourself. Do I do these things? Do I drop Arabic words? Do I wear things that, present me in a foreign way? Do I talk about Islam in a way that is interesting and compelling and that doesn't fall back to the typical phraseology that is used out there? And check your friends and, and do something to make a difference. And I think everyone has their own, skill set and tools and whatever, but I think every little bit makes a difference. So that's it. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسلام على محمد وآله وأصحابه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام. I wear this hat when I have a headache. It actually helps, but the headache is getting better, I think. I put this out, which was gifted to the Usuli Institute. There is good evidence that this is a legitimate footprint of the Prophet ﷺ. So I just put it out for people to, it should be out. People should be able to look at it. And in the back here, under it, is the certificate that explains what it is and so on. We live in a time where it's important for us to feel connected to various things in the tradition, and to just it helps in perseverance, and it helps in patience. Before I get to Surah Al-Tin, just a comment. As I always say, I never know what Grace is going to talk about, and again I underscore that it's very sexist to assume that just because a woman is married to a man that it must be that her views are his views, or his views are her views. So Grace is her own person. She has her own opinions, entirely independent of mine, and we often disagree on a lot of things. And not that that doesn't mean I disagree with what she said, but just to underscore that point again, it's just unbecoming of people that when they don't respect the independence and autonomy of a human being just because that human being is a woman. Okay, but what Grace was talking about is really interesting, because it's in my last khutbah I mentioned Rupert Murdoch, who, if you don't know who Rupert Murdoch is I don't know where his family made all their money, but he's a billionaire, and he was knighted by the Catholic Church, although he's not Catholic. Yeah, and if you Google him, you'll see the information. He was knighted by the Catholic Church, although he's not Catholic. He's very pro-Zionist, very Christian right, but most importantly for us, he spent millions upon millions of dollars. I mean, some say $1 billion, creating media outlets that vilify and attack Islam. There was a recent study that in Australia alone, the Rupert Murdoch empire publishes every day 10 articles that demonize Islam and Muslims. And in fact, the guy who committed the massacre in New Zealand, his psychology and his ideological format was created, was sculpted, was engineered by the Murdoch media empire. That's where he learned to hate Muslims. It's a very interesting study on. But in the khutbah, and I just, what Grace talked about, it's very difficult to. Studying the Quran is wonderful, but studying the Quran has to always be in light of the way our life unfolds. Meaning that the Quran is a book of divine wisdom that engages us so that we can in fact translate it into action in our life, so that we can set the groundwork for the hereafter. If you engage the Quran and it doesn't change the way you manage your life, then effectively the Quran becomes just an abstraction, and it is, from my view, belittling the Quran and the divine message. So for instance, so many Muslims nowadays, they confront trials and tribulations, they confront hardships, and the entire message of the Quran about perseverance and patience as a core value of a Muslim is forgotten. And if you haven't internalized the Quranic message about patience and perseverance, you could very well lose your faith, and that does happen to a lot of people. A lot of the Muslims nowadays say, well, where is God's victory in all this mess? Well, read your Quran carefully, because God's victory doesn't unfold within your timeline. But what your piety requires you to do is to hold on, not to the superficial qusur, the superficial rituals, but to hold on to that core understanding and core belief of your relationship with Allah and what that relationship requires of you. But the thing that's just extremely striking, and I'm sorry to keep harping on this, but when I meet my Maker, I have to be able to say, I spoke about the most important battle, the most important war that confronts Muslims today again and again and again, because I think all of us are accountable. For those who are out there hearing me, why is there someone like Rupert Murdoch who is willing to spend millions of dollars to demonize Islam? Where are the Muslim Rupert Murdochs who are willing to spend an equal number of dollars to defend Islam? Where are you? And I'll tell you, the thing that struck me about what Grace said, I was in that meeting in the early 2000s that she spoke about. And she was being nice. The reaction of the Muslim leaders when she made that suggestion about hiring a PR firm was absolute indignation. They looked at her as if she's an idiot. It was not even respectful. And I'll tell you that immigrant culture, because still we are mostly doctors and engineers and computer scientists for the most part, we don't appreciate the importance of social media or the importance of public relations or the importance of how to influence and shape public opinion. And that if you shape public opinion, that becomes a reality. The response to what Grace said in that meeting was, well, no, those who defend Islam have to be people of conviction, of iman, not professionals who are paid money. That belongs to a very different age. That belongs to, where you think that the way you're going to defend Islam is to go in a demonstration and say Takbir, Allahu Akbar. I actually think in a demonstration, if you want to appeal to public opinion, don't say Takbir. Don't say Allahu Akbar. Craft your message accordingly. Again, for those out there who hear me, I have been waiting 30 years for someone to come and say, I'm gonna give you millions of dollars and I want you to do nothing but rise to the challenge of defending the Islamic message. It hasn't happened, and you get to a point where you just, Allah tells us you have to convey the message, and it's up to Allah whether it's answered or not. But every time I convey the message, I am putting every Muslim who is able and doesn't act on the spot, because they're going to be held to account if they heard the message and they turned away from it. I'll tell you another thing that I have been looking at recently. It was a couple of years ago. I think it was, maybe I wrote down no, I didn't. I think maybe 2017 or 2016. Did you guys know about that Mossad agent that was captured in Benghazi fighting with ISIS? No? Okay, well, there's this guy called Ephraim Enbar. Ephraim Enbar went to Benghazi in 2000, went to Libya in 2011. He was among the Arabist Israeli intelligence, Mustaraba. The Israeli intelligence has a unit of people who are very fluent in Arabic and they look Arab and they infiltrate Arab organizations. So Ephraim Enbar goes to Benghazi. He pretends to be an imam. He gets about 200 followers. And he's leading a Daesh, an ISIS unit that is purportedly was the one involved in the Coptic massacre of Copts in Libya. If you've heard about the Daesh unit captured a bunch of Egyptian Copts and executed them on film, well, the people who reportedly did that was the Ephraim Enbar unit. Eventually, Ephraim Enbar is captured, and Libya releases the information that his name, his assumed Daesh name or ISIS name was Abu Hafs. He called himself Abu Hafs. That Abu Hafs, in fact, is Ephraim Enbar, an Israeli intelligence fellow. Now, of course, although this was reported on, but I've not met many Muslims who have even heard of the story. But this dovetails with another reality. There were stories about Israel taking in Daesh fighters, wounded Daesh fighters in the Golan area. And at the time, Israeli apologists said, oh, well, it's just a humanistic thing. It's because, Israel feels sorry for them. But then reports came out that shed a lot of, that presented a far more complex picture. So, if you're interested, there's a fellow called Benjamin Ephraim. Benjamin Ephraim. No, sorry, I made a mistake. Forgive me. Abu Hafs is Benjamin Ephraim. Abu Hafs is Benjamin Ephraim. Ephraim Anbar is someone else I'm going to talk about in a second. But again, I repeat, the ISIS guy was Benjamin Ephraim, the Abu Hafs guy. Okay, so a fellow called Ephraim Anbar, who is the director of an organization called BESA, B-E-S-A. BESA stands for Begin Sadat, the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. So, Ephraim Anbar, and this, by the way, BESA, the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, is a very influential think tank, not just in Israel, but in the U.S. I mean, you can Google it again, and you can read a lot of material about who BESA is connected to and who they have an influence with and so on. But even in academic circles, BESA is quite influential. So Ephraim Anbar writes a study in which he says it is not in Israel's interest that Daesh be defeated. And that we need Daesh because they are rabidly anti-Shia and they redirect the violence towards Shia Muslims. Second, that they dovetail well with something called the Yinon Plan. Okay, what is the Yinon Plan? Again, Muslims don't read. There's a fellow who's a head of Israeli military intelligence. His name was, or is, Herzi Halevi. Herzi Halevi wrote an article in which he advocates the Yinon Plan is an attempt to convince the U.S. that in order for Israel to be safe in the long term, it is necessary to break up as many Arab countries as possible, so that it's necessary for Iraq to be divided into a number of Sunni, Shia, and Kurdi nations, and it is important that Syria be divided up into several nations, and it also talks about Sudan and some other countries, that Libya would be divided up, that Yemen would be divided, Yemen would be divided up. This is not conspiracy theory. This is published material. This is the Yinon Plan. You can look up the Ephraim Anbar strategic study and read it for yourself. You can look up the Herzi Halevi article and read it for yourself. I mean, this material is not just, someone sitting there saying, "Oh, there's a secret Zionist plan somewhere." No, and it's not a. It is elements within the Israeli right that believe that it is in the best interest of Israel. They don't represent all Israelis, obviously, leave alone Jews, but that it is in the best interest of Israel that the Arab countries be broken up, so that the Palestinian issue is completely forgotten as Arabs completely become preoccupied with their own issues. That it turns the rules of the game around. If Syria gets divided into several nations, if Iraq gets divided, if Yemen gets divided, if Libya gets divided, etc., etc. And importantly, in the discourse of people like Ephraim Anbar and Halevi, that Daesh, it's a strategic mistake to completely destroy Daesh. They argue that it is important to limit Daesh, to keep it under control, but it's also important to keep it alive. Now, this dovetails with a lot of articles you can find about Israel arming Daesh, helping Daesh, hoping, even with supplying things like the Abu Hafs fellow. There are also a lot of material out there about the Emirati-Saudi-Israeli alliance in keeping the terrorist threat alive, because as long as there is a terrorist threat in Egypt, in Libya, in Sudan, in Yemen, and so on, democracy doesn't stand a chance. No one is in the mood to talk about democracy if there is a consistent and persistent terrorist threat. Now, all of this would be, again, you might say, well, okay, yeah, but this is politics. Why is it? How does this dovetail with Rupert Murdoch? How does it connect to Rupert Murdoch? The most striking thing, and then, again, this is something that I've been doing research on recently, the most striking thing for me is how all of this is tied to certain things that we don't even pay a lot of attention to, as mind-boggling as that might be. So, I don't know, how many of you have heard of Joel Zaman? Okay, Joel, I also keep calling him George. Joel Zaman is an ex-Israeli military guy who owns a PR firm that shapes public opinion. And in order to retain his firm to work for you, to shape public opinion on social media, you hire his firm for about $300 million. So we're talking about a very expensive business, right? Well, who is Joel Zaman, the ex-military Israeli guy? His business associations are with who? None other than George Nader, the guy who was just arrested for child pornography. George Nader is very close and very well connected to who? To the Crown Prince of the Emirat and to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so, and this is, by the way, part of the Mueller report. I mean, again, Muslims just don't do their homework. It's in the Mueller report, people. So, you have Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, and do you know what Blackwater is? Blackwater murdered thousands of Muslims in Iraq. Blackwater, it's now changed its name to change its name several times, is basically a ex-military men for hire that go in and they fight wars for you, military mercenaries. They kill people in Libya, they kill people in Yemen. They exclusively, by the way, kill Muslims.
Their headquarters is in Abu Dhabi, I think.
Yeah. So Eric Prince, according to in the Mueller report, meets with George Nader, who in turn meet with Joel Zaman. Why? Because the Crown Prince of the Emirat wanted to help Trump get elected, that's one, and wanted to convince the American administration to accept Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So, again, according to the Mueller report, in 2016, even without notifying Obama, by the way, I mean, they did it, which is against the law for this meeting to take place without the Obama administration being informed of it. But you had Eric Prince, George Nader, Joel Zaman meet with Donald Trump Jr. and meet with who else? Meet with Kushner and Michael Flynn. And again, do your homework. You can read in the Mueller report where it says about these meetings. But what really is mind-boggling and striking is you have money coming from the Emirates and Saudi that hires an Israeli firm through the go-between of Joel Nader and Eric Prince. They act as in-betweens. And they hire this Israeli firm, give that Israeli firm $300 million or more to influence American politics. But the venue to influence American politics is through none other than Kushner, Michael Flynn, and Bannon. So there is a meeting, for instance, that takes place in right after Trump is elected, where there's Michael Flynn, Steve Bannon, George Nader, Mohammed bin Zayed, here in New York, and Yusuf al-Ataiba, the UN, the Emirati ambassador to the U.S., right? So, but think about it. Just pause and think about this for a second. We Muslims have to be able to understand the narrative and stop being so clueless. There's evidence that Saudi Arabia and Israel are supporting ISIS. They're accusing Qatar of doing it, although there's no evidence that in fact Qatar has ever supported ISIS. In the same time, they want the most Islamophobic president. The president who says Islam doesn't like us. The president that's going to put the Muslim ban. They want him in power. And to get him in power, who do they meet and talk to? Michael Flynn, who's, if you've read Michael Flynn's book, I forgot what it was called, but horrible book. He trashes Islam in the most fascist way you can imagine. Steve Bannon doesn't need introduction. His fascist views on Islam are well known. So they meet up with these Islamophobes, and they're all buddies. And then somehow we play politics when it comes to the issues of to issues that will affect the fate of Muslims for centuries to come. So, for instance, we had a demonstration organized to take place in front of this past Friday, and it was supposed to be in front of the Saudi consulate about the scholars that were arrested in Saudi Arabia. Now, mind you, when you're a political prisoner, these people, every day that passes, they're tortured. So every day, any of them can expire. And MBS imprisoned the scholars that have the intelligence and the moderation and the nuance to be able to say something like, why are we funding Islamophobes like Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn? Why are we funding Islamophobes like Kushner? Why are we in bed with Zamil in order to promote Islamophobes? How can you do this while you are the leaders of a country like Saudi Arabia? How can this happen? So in order to preempt all of this, clearly MBS imprisoned every scholar that potentially had the intelligence or the courage to say anything about this. Now, not only that, but read the Israeli media celebrating the arrest of these scholars. The Israeli media was like cheering MBS and saying he's a hero because he imprisoned, no one could have imprisoned so many Muslim scholars in one big swoop and got away with it. So every day that passes, I wait for news because I've lost so many friends in Egyptian torture chambers. Every day that passes, I wait for the news that, okay, another one died. So the plan was we were going to go in front of the Saudi consulate and we were going to have Jum'ah and I was going to give the khutbah I get news that Mass decided to postpone or cancel, I don't know and I don't care, the demonstration in front of the Saudi consulate because they want to talk about it. And they are planning a bigger event. I'll tell you through my experience, when you start hearing Muslims talk saying, oh, we're planning a bigger event, means then it will go nowhere. We refuse to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that we have to stand on principle and ethics, because that's what's going to define us. We can't say, oh, well, this is politics, and we're just concerned with our person and with spirituality. We have to be concerned with what our religion is going to stand for, because right now there are it's like a very one-sided war. There are a lot of people who are investing a lot of money into bashing and demeaning our religion. The results of the people who suffer this, that suffer the consequences, are the people thrown in prisons because of the Islamophobia of Muslim leaders, because Sisi is an Islamophobe, MBS is an Islamophobe, the Crown Prince of Emirat is an Islamophobe. Just because you're a Muslim doesn't mean you're not an Islamophobe. They are Islamophobes. If you listen to Sisi's speeches, they mirror the speech that would be given by Daniel Pipe or Steve Bannon. Islam is a problem in the world. Islam has to change, otherwise Muslims will always be terrorists. That's the president of Egypt. So, people are investing tons of money in bashing our religion. We forget the immigrant mentality of, well, we want Muslim governments to respond. I'll tell you something about Muslim governments responding. If Saudi Arabia and if the Emirat are giving money to Islamophobic organizations and Islamophobes like Kushner and Bannon and Joel Zaman and George Nader, who himself is an Islamophobe, leave alone a pedophile, they're not interested in funding anything to counter Islamophobes. They're only interested in giving money to people who are going to build mosques and wear hijab. That's their Islam. That's what they want. Palestine, forget it. You know, if you're a Palestinian, you might as well kiss your butt goodbye. Jerusalem, forget it. They're not interested. Democracy, civil rights, human rights, they're not interested. And I know that I say this because for the recording, not necessarily for the people who are here, because the people who are here are, I'm not pointing the finger at you, obviously. So, the message from Allah is clear. It is personal, private Muslims, very much like Rupert Murdoch, who have to pick up the slack. If you are sitting there as a Muslim, this day and age, enjoying your luxury car and your luxury furniture and your luxury home, in this climate today, then shame, shame, and shame on you. You will be held responsible in the final day for all of it. Because if you have even a bit of extra money, you should find someone who's willing to fight the fight, like the Usuli Institute, and give it to them. And say, here, God bless you, go. Khalas. And I'm not Arabic dropping, but I'm an Arab. And, it is, so people, it has reached a point where, you just sit in front of Allah every night, and I thought, Allah, I am doing and Allah knows, and of course Grace knows, because she's I am coming under enormous amount of pressure because of my stand about Saudi Arabia and Salman al-Auda. Despite that, we insist that we're going to invite Abdullah al-Auda, Salman's son, and I'm going to have a conversation with him, and consequences be damned, because I can't see all these Muslims being tortured to death, and sit here and say, well, I care about my job, I care about my reputation. I am coming under unbelievable pressure. The threats are a complete destruction. I don't want to give, we're trying to see what we're going to do about, but people are, your voice gets raised, they start spending money to destroy you, to completely erase you and erase your reputation. And I turn to my fellow Muslims, and I can't even count, if I am a Muslim and I am held in a prison and being tortured, what would I hope that Muslims in the West would do? I would hope that they would work very hard to get me out, because I know how it is to be tortured. Do you think you're tortured and you forgive those people who are sitting there going to movies and having dinners and going to play exercise and enjoying their lives? You don't. Torture is horrible. And you say, Allah, where are people? Why aren't they helping me? So I put myself in their shoes. And I say, I know how much someone like Salman al-Auda is suffering every day. I mean, how they feed him? They take food, they put it in a bag, they mush the food up, and then throw it on the floor, and his hands are tied behind his back, and he has to break the back with his teeth and eat off the floor. And the floor has pee and poop and blood. His teeth got all scratched and chipped because from trying to get at the food. This is Salman al-Auda, one of the greatest scholars of our age. Look at his age and look at his health. Do you think he's going to survive this for very long? Do you think he forgives Muslims when Muslims cancel a demonstration because, we want to gear up support? With the Emirat designated MAS as a terrorist organization, designated CARE as a terrorist organization, designated ISNA and ICNA as terrorist organizations. That's the Emirat. And still Muslims, till now, come and tell me, why are you saying anything about the Emirat, brother? No, they have a ministry of tolerance. Are you insane? Where's your morality? Where's your ethics? I'm not talking again. I'm talking to the recording, not to you guys. I mean, there's a dua where the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah, I complain to you about how weak I am and how lonely I am. Don't leave me in the hands of my enemy to do with me as you will, as they will. And you get a point where you constantly repeat this dua, because you can see your own destruction coming, and you know that the road is no one is going to help you, but you have to fall yelling and screaming because of the principle. And the principle is everything, because it is what Allah wants. And Allah demanded that we persevere and struggle. So I'll close this before we go to Surah. And this interestingly, by the way, will dovetail with Surah 13, just the way Allah makes things work. You people who are out there, who have millions, those millions should be spent on PR organizations, on media organizations, on academics, on anyone, not on medical doctors and engineers. Enough. People who can, in fact, rise to the defense of Islam and expose realities and shape public perception. We are universally hated as Muslims everywhere. Even the Muslims themselves have become Islamophobes. I'll just give you one small example. Islamophobes in the colonial age, in the colonial age, Orientalists came and wrote, the Prophet had concubines. Several Muslim scholars responded to this back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It died. It died. Then Islamophobes today brought it back again. The Prophet had concubines. While the report is he received 2 concubines, one of them he freed and married, and the other he freed and she went back home. Remarkably, I still meet Muslims everywhere that come and say, the Prophet had concubines. That's the effect of Islamophobia. Something so simple, something so clear in the resource material, and you can't even address it. So Islamophobia has even nestled in your own brains. If your child doesn't want to be a Muslim, it's because of Islamophobia. If your child and my child grows up and says, I'm not, yucky, it's Islamophobia. So it's haram if you have any extra money and you're not responding. It's as simple as that. That's the position I've reached. And again, I am paying an unbelievable cost. We were, this whole past week, we were meeting with lawyers. A lawyer that's going to charge $900 an hour. Because of the position I'm taking about Salman al-Auda. Haram. This is not right. I'm sorry. Alhamdulillah, we'll declare bankruptcy, but alhamdulillah, I'm not going to shut up. And I'm telling them, if they want me to shut up, they're going to have to kill me. Because I'm not going to shut up. Bankruptcy is not going to shut me up. Losing my job is not going to shut me up. If you want to shut me up, kill me. I'll make it very simple for you. There's no other way. Okay, let's pray Asr and then start. We need to pray. Okay, so you guys heard about the halal disco that was opened in Jeddah?
Wait a minute. Halal disco.
Halal disco.
Cool.
What does that even mean?
That's using our language, right?
Yeah, but it's
Disco. No one uses disco anymore.
We're bringing it back.
You know, when I first saw this thing about halal disco, I thought it must be like, someone says let's shake and boogie, and then they all say Ameen. Okay, so Al-Teen was Zaytun. SubhanAllah, again, all the surah of the Quran has, if you engage it where it becomes second nature to you, when it enters into your very molecular structure, you really understand, Allah helps you to understand how the Quran builds a human being. So, first, Surah Al-Teen, most scholars agree that it was revealed in the Meccan period. Interestingly enough, maybe oddly, there are a few scholars that said no, it was revealed at the beginning of the Medinian period, although it's probably Meccan in all likelihood. And it starts out, Amanda, do you have okay, so it starts out very simply, and we'll talk about the way, so read through all of it.
Okay.
It's short.
In the name of God, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy. By the fig, by the olive, by Mount Sinai, by this safe city, we created man in the finest state, then reduced him to the lowest of the low. But those who believe and do good deeds will have an unfailing reward. After this, what makes you, man, deny the judgment? Is God not the most decisive of judges?
So, it first starts out with the fig and the olive. Allah swearing by let's say by now, tin was figs and olives. And of course, that immediately begs the question, well, why figs and why olives? And it is not, it is unusual in the Quran that Allah swears by food items. So this, of course, has given Quranic commentators a lot of pause, and it generated a very interesting discussion about what is it referring to when it says figs and olives. So, and as what you usually do in our methodology, we start, we go through layers of meanings. So, first school, the Zahir school, the school that tends to understand the Quran in a literal way, that hermeneutically is committed to a literal understanding of the word of the Quran. And the literal school said, well, if it says teen or zaytun, then it must mean teen and zaytun. It must mean figs and olives. But that kept that doesn't really respond, or doesn't really explain, well, why would God swear by figs and olives in particular? Some of them, and you find this explained well in Tafsir al-Razi, for instance, talks about how figs are very unusual. It's a very unusual fruit, that it's a fruit that is very nutritional. It's a miracle in itself, and sort of extends the same courtesy to olives as food of great nutrition and great value. And there's a lot of material that you can read about the medicinal qualities of figs and olives and so on. Of course, I'm not in a position to evaluate or even have an opinion about whether what they're saying about the nutritional value of figs and olives is true or not. I simply don't know. It is interesting, if you've ever heard of this group called There Is No Clash. It's videos that are made by people to try to prove that Islam or that the Quran is consistent with science and so on. They had an interesting interpretation about why figs and olives. They said that figs and olives were in fact the first food items in human evolution, and that in fact the first humans, and again, you can look it up, it's called There Is No Clash, and watch the video and make up your own mind as to whether how you evaluate their arguments that figs and olives in fact refer to a very important nutritional items to the very first human beings on earth. And they claim that in particular it's not just figs and olives, but figs and olives in a particular area in Ethiopia, which we will come, and where they say that humans evolved or began their evolution in that particular spot in Ethiopia, and they argue that this is actually the spot where Adam and Eve were, and that Adam and Eve consumed figs and olives as their first nutritional items. We will come back to some of this because it dovetails with things in the tradition that are very interesting. Okay, so now there is a very next level. A lot of commentators said that the reference to figs and olives is a reference to an important scene or an important episode in the story of creation, and that is when, after the fall, Adam and Eve becoming aware of their human physicality, their bodies, and as they inhabit earth and they become aware of the laws on earth, they also they develop human sentiments like shame and embarrassment, and so that reportedly there is hadith to that effect that Adam and Eve first start covering their bodies with fig leaves. And there's probably an apocryphal story about Adam even befriending wild animals by feeding them figs. And I'm not going to get into these reports because they're sort of a bit outlandish and they're problematic. He meets hyenas, and then he feeds them figs, and then the hyenas befriend Adam, and the story goes on from there. Anyway, so some said, well, this dovetails to the fact that the fig tree provided the first leaves by which human beings started covering their bodies, and that because olives grow naturally, you don't have to, in certain areas, especially on mountaintops, that they started eating olives as their first food item. And that story is the way that it is adapted and used by modern folks like those folks who do these videos, There Is No Clash. I thought it is rather interesting. Okay, so that's all within the traditional school of interpretation that said, well, when it says teen and zaytun, that it means specifically figs or fig trees, and zaytun, olives or olive trees. However, that is not the dominant position in the Islamic tradition. On this point, the Zahiri, the literal school, is not the dominant one. But the majority school said that its reference to figs and olives must be read in light to its reference when it goes on to say وَهَذَا الْبَلَدُ الْأَمِينَ, and this blessed land. So they argued, or they understood this as a reference to geographic areas, not a reference simply to figs and olives. And what are the geographic areas? It's interesting that there are 3 prophets that receive their first revelation on 3 mountaintops. So the prophet Musa receives his revelation on Jabal Sina, Batur Sina, the mountain in Sina, known as Tur Sina, which still exists. Isa receives his revelation on the mountain of Tur Sa'ura, which is in Palestine. And Muhammad ﷺ receives his revelation on Jabal Farran, where Ghar Hira is. So 3 mountaintops, one in Mecca, one in Palestine, and one in Sina, Egypt. So Tur Sina, Tur Sa'ura, and Jabal Farran. Okay. A step further, many scholars said, well, if the reference is not just to the mountaintops where these 3 pivotal prophets receive revelation, but it is actually a reference to blessed areas, what in the Islamic tradition they refer to as masajid. Now, a masajid, mosque, which means mosque, masjid is a mosque, masajid is plural. It is, you don't need the construction of an actual building with minarets for it to be a masjid. The entire earth is a masjid, for one. The entire earth is described by Allah as a masjid. But beyond that, any area that Allah has blessed as its area of a revered, and we talked about the issue of geography and space and time in the previous halaqa, why certain areas on earth are chosen. And so they argued that the teen was zaytun, the teen is a reference to a masjid in Damascus, a blessed area in Damascus. And as zaytun is a reference to the masjid of Bayt al-Maqdis, the mosque in Jerusalem. And Tur Sina is a reference to the blessed area in Sina, where Moses receives his revelation. Now, that actually becomes the majority opinion, is that At-Tin wa Zaytun wa Tur Sinin refers to three areas, one in Damascus, one in Palestine, which is the Jerusalem where the Aqsa Mosque is, and one in Sinai, where Mount Sinai, where Moses receives his revelation. Okay. Now, there are a few other interesting things to say about the reference to At-Tin wa Zaytun wa Tur Sinin. In Tur Sinin, although most Arabs, later Arabs, understood it as Tur Sina, the Mount Sinai, where Moses received the revelation, in Syriac, Tur Sinin referred to Tur Tayna wa Tur Zayta. Sorry, not Tur Sinin. Wat-Tin wa Zaytun referred to Tur Tayna and Tur Zayta. So in Syriac, Tin wa Zaytun referred to two mountaintops that are also in Damascus and Palestine. It's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting footnote that the Tin and Zaytun, even in Syriac, refer to these two specific locations. For our purposes, it's not that important, though. Okay. Now, there is a step further, though. Again, around this Tin and Zaytun, the swearing by the figs and the olives. And now, again, the levels of interpretation. So the next level of interpretation said, well, the reference to figs, yes, it refers to a blessed mountaintop in Syria. Yes, it refers to the blessed mountain of Al-Aqsa Mosque, what becomes the Aqsa Mosque. But it has a deeper meaning, and a meaning that ties to the rest of the surah. And that is the figs are food to the body that is full of nutritional value, that doesn't, unlike watermelons or unlike unlike apples, the axis, the way that it doesn't have a hardened shell. In other words, it doesn't pose any type of challenge for human consumption. It's like the fruit that is a gift from Allah to fill human beings with nutrition, and it grows with very little effort. It grows year around, It doesn't have a season. And interestingly, one of the things that I read that always stuck with me is the fruit of the tree precedes the growth of the leaves of the tree, which is very interesting. So it's a very generous fruit. And they said that is a reference to what Allah will later on remind us is ahsan taqweem, that we have perfected human beings. We've created dignified human beings. We've created human beings in the best form and shape. So the teen connects to that part of human perfection. Amanda, how does he translate taqweem again? In the best form?
In the finest state.
The finest state, okay. So the fig harkens forward to that physical part or nutritional part of the finest state and the finest form. Olives, however, in that next level of tafsir, refers symbolically to the fact that the olive oil is used for light. You use olive oil, especially at that time, for light. And you read quite a bit about how the reference to az-zaytun alludes to the light of understanding and intellect. So when Allah will tell us, we've perfected the human state, we've perfected the human form, that is why Allah swears by the figs and zaytun, not just to remind us of sacred geography, whether that sacred geography is the place of revelation for Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, but there is a deeper meaning, and that is for Allah to say, when I perfected your state, I gave you two elements for that perfection. The physical element, represented by the figs, and the intellectual element, represented by olives, which is the light of enlightenment. Qadi Abdul Jabbar makes, who was of course a Mu'tazili, makes he writes a great deal about this particular surah, which he, like Surah Iqra, he considers one of the pivotal surahs that turns Muslims towards the importance of the intellect as playing a pivotal role in human development. Okay. So that's the teen and zaytun. Now, Tur Sinin, we said that Tur Sinin is a reference to Tur Sina, the Sinai mountaintop. Some scholars said that it's in Ethiopian language, it's a reference to Al-Jabal, a mountain that used to be known as Al-Jabal al-Hasan. And in fact, in old Ethiopian language, Sinin meant whatever is beautiful. So when it says Tur Sinin, some said that it actually is not a reference to Mount Sinai. It's a reference to the mountaintop in Ethiopia known as the beautiful mountaintop, or Jabal al-Hasan. Hasan means just beautiful. Or a reference to the reality of beauty itself. Now, interestingly, the people who did the videos on There Is No Clash argue that mountaintop, which was known in Ethiopian language, now it has a different name, I don't remember what it's called now, but what was known as Al-Jabal al-Hasan, or the Hasan mountaintop, that's the location that purportedly Adam and Eve started in. So if you watch that videos, they actually hone in on that interpretation, and they say, see, it's a reference to the Adam and Eve, and that's what it's swearing by, not by Mount Sinai and where Moses receives his revelation. For in particularly tafsirs of Sufi bent, they say in your first stage of development you understand Tur Sinin as a reference to the mountaintop of Sinai. As you develop further with the Quran, you understand that when Allah says Tur Sinin, Allah is actually referring to a plane of beauty, so that Allah reminds you by the basic elements that are necessary for the human form and the human state. The good nutrition, represented by figs, the light of the intellect, represented by the olive oil, and the sinin, which is beauty, al-husn. Now, of course, you know, the grammarians object to this by saying, well, sinin means husn or beauty in Ethiopian, and why would the Quran be using Ethiopian? Which the Sufis have protracted responses to, and this has been going on between grammarians and mystics forever. Now, I have to say that, of course, you know, all of us, if you were raised Muslim, you memorize Surah At-Tin early on in your life, and most Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims, will repeat that surah, never really pausing about, you know, to think about what it means, because that's what most born Muslims do. But as you develop spiritually, the way it resonates with you is in very powerful ways and even transformative ways. And it's as if you can start visualizing if you recite it in a state of dhikr, it's as if you can visualize what Allah is, the way Allah ties the wisdom of creation to sacred geography, to sacred time in a single surah, in a very powerful and overwhelming ways. Okay, so والتين والزيتون وطور السنين وهذا البلد الأمين. Now, and this, now Amin means safe, and it also could mean sacred. When it says وهذا البلد الأمين, it's referring to Mecca. Interestingly, Mecca, even in the pre-Islamic era, Mecca had a special status in that you were not supposed to shed blood in Mecca, and you were not supposed to capture slaves. So you were not allowed to take prisoners of war as slaves in Mecca, because Mecca was supposed to have this sanctity. And in fact, Allah reminds Meccans elsewhere in the Quran that Allah reminds Meccans that Allah has given them this great blessing, is that He has made their geography, their sacred space, or made their space sacred and safe. And that while all around them in the Arabian Peninsula there is violence and there is people taken captive and so on, Allah reminds Meccans, I've made you safe and I've fed you. Why don't you recognize your indebtedness to me and worship me? Because that is not an accident that I've given you that special status. I have to tell you that when I hear something like the halal disco in Jeddah, the part of me that has grown up with the Islamic tradition, I cringe because Hijaz has always had a special status in Islamic history. For the most part, compared to other parts of the world, it has enjoyed a relative amount of safety and peace and security and stability. With some exceptions, like the invasion of the Karamita, for instance, or like the war between Abdullah ibn Zubair and the Umayyads. But for the most part, Mecca has enjoyed that special status where the amount of violence and the amount of civil discord and the amount of lack of safety has been, it's as if it's protected by Allah. I mean, that's the only way I can put it. And when these commercializing of Hijaz take place, I cringe because I feel like it's eating away at that sanctity and that sacredness. And that, you know, if you open up to the material world and inject the material world into the sacred space of the Hijaz, it's only a matter of time before you feel all the evils of the material world full swoop. You know, one prays that someone with some wisdom in Saudi would realize that, you know, it's very dangerous to play that game, because commercializing Mecca it's as if you are eroding the sacredness of the space itself and the special status that it has had throughout history, before Islam and after Islam. I mean, look at Jerusalem, and look at what happens when various political designs start, or political ambitions start interfering with sacred space. It does horrible things. Okay, so وهذا البلد, I mean, everyone pretty much that I've ever read agrees that it's a reference to Mecca, with one exception, one opinion that said no, it's a reference to Medina, but I think everyone disagreed with that opinion. So it's a reference to Mecca. So Allah is, and that bolsters the opinion that وَالتِّينُ وَالزَّيْتُونَ وَطُورِ سِنِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلْدُ الْأَمِينَ is Allah swearing by sacred space, and sacred space that has meaning. Okay. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We've created human beings in the best of state, or perfected the state or form of human beings. Now this, surprisingly, unlike modern tafsirs that usually have very short commentaries on this and move on, you can read a great amount of material in the Islamic tradition on this one ayah. وَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We've created human beings in the best of form. Why? Because taqweem comes from qawama or qawwama. It's the same word. Qawwa means to structure, to build. It's the same root word for qiwama, which means to have authority over something, or to be responsible for something, or accountable for something. And it is also the same word for the same root for the word qiyam, which means ethics and values. So when Allah says we create, وَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, Allah is not just referring to the physicality of human beings. Many commentators point out to the fact that human beings were the only beings created up straight, standing up straight. What is the importance of that? Dignity. That all other animals or other mammals were created with a level of stoop. Their face doesn't stand in a dignified, up straight posture. But that one of the ways that Allah dignified human beings is to allow them to stand in a way that is fit only for Allah. And that is in a straight posture, with the head raised high. If you've ever read in the Islamic tradition that Muslims considered it impious, or at least makruh, if not haram, to bow down before any other human being, it comes from this. That Allah dignified human beings by saying, you stand up straight, you only bow to me as Allah. Now, of course, modern, and here where you see politics affects theology, modern Muslims, when you compare modern commentaries on خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم, on pre-modern commentaries, the gap is enormous. I mean, pre-modern commentaries go on and on and on about how the dignified posture of a Muslim is one of a straight posture. And in fact, some of them even go far as saying that it is makruh to sit slouched. You should sit with your back straight, because dignified. Allahu Alam, again, it's interesting. But it's very interesting that among modern commentaries, they usually pass over this ayah. And I think it's because, to speak of human dignity among modern Muslims is very dangerous. There are consequences. And to say some things to Muslims like, well, you shouldn't bow to any other, you shouldn't bow before other human beings. Well, if you're ever asked to meet the king or the president or something, you either bow or die, or be tortured to death. So it's an interesting point. Now, في أحسن تقويم, however, the next level, it says, well, it's not just the أحسن تقويم is the dignity of a posture, but the dignity of attributes, divine attributes that Allah shared uniquely with human beings. That only human beings were dignified, and this is why Allah tells the jinn to prostrate before Adam, because Allah dignified human beings with divine attributes. According to these sources, what are these attributes? They're the following: life, knowledge, power, will, speech, hearing, and sight. Should I say them again one more time?
Yes.
Okay. Life, knowledge, power, will, speech, hearing, and sight. So when Allah refers to ahsan taqweem, we perfected the human form, we perfected the human stance, that Allah says, I have not only given you a dignified physical posture, I have not only referenced sacred geography and also reference to you, if you're wise, what you as a human being must understand as critical for who you are: nutrition, intellect. But when I breathed into you when Allah breathed into us from Rawhillah, and I don't know how to translate Rawh because it's not really the soul or spirit of Allah, but Allah breathed into us, that I've allowed you to share human attributes, which is something that it was not extended to any other created form. With that, of course, comes accountability. So what you're endowed to, what you're entitled to by the nature of your creation, your natural state, is a natural state in which you are dignified and you're entitled to dignity, and in which if you use life, knowledge, power, will, speech, hearing, and sight appropriately, in which if you use these attributes in the right way, you will in fact rise up to your potential expressed in the ayah as ahsan taqweem, in the most beautified, in the most perfected, in the most esteemed form. Okay. And Abdul Jabbar, this is where Abdul Jabbar takes off, Qadi Abdul Jabbar, and has a long part about the balance between the intellect, will, and power that, of course, and you can read between the lines, because if you have free will and you have the power to affect your own fate and determine your own fate, there comes a great responsibility. And if you do it in the righteous way, you have honored yourself as a human being. But if you don't do it in a righteous way, if you use your sight and your hearing and your speech to do foul things or to be unjust to yourself, then what is the consequence? You degrade yourself. And this takes us to the next ayah. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلُ السَّافِلِينَ. Here, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا, two main schools of thought. The Zahir school, the literal school, said when Allah says ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا, we, meaning Allah, I'm sorry, how is that translated?
Yeah, it says, and then reduced him to the lowest of the low.
So, the literal school said when Allah says, then reduced him, here the doer is Allah. It's as if Allah saying, then I, Allah, reduced him, human beings, to the lowest of the low. Of course, with the literal school, how does, if Allah created us in ahsan taqweem, how could Allah reduce us to the lowest of the low? And they said, well, that's a reference to the fact that human beings age, and as they age, they reverse. They start stooping, their back curves, they get shorter, their memory starts withering away, their eyesight starts withering away, their hearing starts withering away. So it's as if Allah is reminding us that I've given you the height of your strength, and remember when you are in the height of your strength, when you're in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s, that the lowest of the low is coming if you live long enough. The longer you live, the more you will see all these things being taken away from you. So that's the Zahiri, the literal school. Everyone else other than the literal school, and it's not a small school, by the way, like Ibn Kathir, for instance, is from the Zahiri school, is from the literal school. Interestingly, even the grammarians, who tend to side with the literal school in most issues, but the grammarians on this ayah didn't side with the literal school. The grammarians sided with the rationalists and the spiritualists and said, no, when it says ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا أَسْفَلُ السَّافِلِينَ, here the will of Allah is contingent on the will of human beings. Qadi Abdul Jabbar says that this is proof that, that when Allah says أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ, isn't Allah the wisest of the wise? Qadi Abdul Jabbar says that it is impossible for Allah to describe himself as Allah's self as wise if in fact Allah is the one that determines your actions, whether good or bad, because the wise cannot commit evil. That's the argument of Qadi Abdul Jabbar, who's again a Mu'tazili. So a wise person cannot do evil, and Qadi Abdul Jabbar said if Allah describes Allah's self as the wisest of the wise, how can anyone believe that ill deeds or evil deeds are determined by Allah or decreed by Allah, because then that couldn't be described as wise. Al-Razi, by the way, has in his tafsir a response to this, and it's a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to go. He tries to refute Qadi Abdul Jabbar, but the short of it is that it is not Allah that creates your evil deed. It's not Allah that tells a murderer to murder or a rapist to rape. You choose your fate among different paths of fate that Allah has created. But you're the one who chooses. So Allah basically says, here's the fate if you rape. Here's the fate if you don't rape. Here's the fate if you fall in love or if you love. Here's the fate if you forgive. It's you who decides which fate to take among these alternative fates that Allah has set. That's Razi's basic response. Of course, I'm simplifying, but that's his basic response to Qadi Abdul Jabbar. However, the majority said when Allah says, then reduce them to the lowest of the low, so it is not a reference to aging. It's a reference to the fact that Allah gives you the potential of ahsan taqweem, of a perfected state. Interestingly, Surah Al-Teen has also had a considerable amount of influence on Al-Farabi, who doesn't often comment on the Quran, but comments on Surah Al-Teen, which is rather interesting footnote. But what happens if you do not use the divine attributes appropriately and don't maintain the mizan? Because the mizan, especially for Sufis, is very important. That the mizan between the nafs, the self, the intellect, the willpower, if you mishandle the balance between these things, you can reduce yourself from the most perfected creature to the lowest of the low. So in other words, you could even become worse than an animal, worse than the worst animal, whatever animal you can imagine.
Oh, but yeah,
So
that makes sense actually.
there are some very interesting grammatical discussions about ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين, but they all go back to, well, does this necessarily mean that is Allah simply doing on the basis of what you willed? So if you will, you decide with your own willpower and your own autonomy, I want to be a disgusting scoundrel. Allah's not going to prevent you. I want to be a coward. Allah's not going to stop you. Allah will maybe give you a sign to tell you, don't be a coward. But if you turn away from the sign, well, that's what free will is. If you, on the other hand, decide to be brave, and Allah's will in the what becomes the majority position, which is a combination of Ash'ari, Maturidi type theology, Allah's will is always contingent on what your willpower, and Allah unfolds your fate on the basis of what you decide. So San'ani, not the Yemeni San'ani, San'ani was of a Sufi orientation, says that only the most disgusting human being would use this verse, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, as an excuse to do everything bad and then blame it on Allah. Say, well, it's not me who decided I want to be so disgusting and lowly. It's Allah who willed it, because Allah doesn't will something unless you will it first. Okay. then the surah comes with the challenge. فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. So why is it that you continue denying the faith?
I think you skipped it.
I'm sorry?
I think you skipped the verse.
Oh,
I think you skipped the verse. And then the Nina Aminu.
sorry.
Yeah,
Oh, how could I skip that? Yeah.
Because I
Sorry.
think that's the exception to the.
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
sorry.
So, إن خلقنا في أحسن تقويم إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. Thank you for reminding me, because how could I forget that? Yeah. So again, Amanda, translate that.
But those who believe and do good deeds.
Yeah. So, أحسن تقويم, what preserves and maintains the perfected state? And what prevents the descent to the lowest of the low? آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. Now, this is classic for the Quranic methodology. Belief in itself, by itself, is not enough. And amal salihat, without belief, doing good deeds, by itself, is not enough. So the perfection of the human state must be maintained through a state of iman, a state of belief, and a constant movement or constant energy, constant projection towards doing good. If belief is not translated into actual good deeds, then it is inept, and the descent to the lowest of the low takes place. And at the same time, if you are doing good deeds but you don't have the belief, it is very much like our modern state of moral relativism, and where you do good deeds, but you do good deeds because basically they make you feel good. But you can't philosophically justify them as anchored in any type of objective reality, objective value system, objective morality. And again, Abdul Jabbar, typical of his school of thought, the rationalist school of thought, which sees human reason as guiding this process of balancing faith with actions. So that when the Mu'tazila, for instance, made the sixth pillar of the faith, Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. So how do I translate it now? I've always translated joining the good.
Joining good and forbidding evil.
I like your translation, but no, I have a complex.
We call people to their conscience to perform acts of beauty, kindness, and grace, and we call people to resist the temptations of pursuing a path of darkness or evil.
Well, okay, what she said. So, Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar.
Yeah, we have to shorten.
It's very powerful. It's far more effective than enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, which is,
The Google people say, don't be evil. Be good, don't be evil.
Yeah, okay, I didn't know that.
They don't listen to themselves. But,
Yeah, they're a multinational corporation. They have no more.
So I mean, when the rationalist school insisted that it's a sixth pillar of faith, it is because of that orientation, that the essence of the Islamic methodology is it must translate into a moral program that takes effect in society itself. Otherwise, and at the same time, morality without anchored in philosophical objectivity very quickly becomes uprooted and becomes utilitarian and becomes very self-centered and selfish. Other than the rationalist school, they all end up in the same place, because whether you belong to the rationalist school or you belong to a semi-rationalist school like the Ash'aris or the Maturidis or so on, you always end up with, well, you cannot honor the divine attributes unless these divine attributes are honored in belief and action. And that is the only thing that can prevent the descent into the lowest of the low, or the potential, the human potential to descend into the lowest of the low. So, فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. So, after this, how can you deny your Lord's message? Where you get the most interesting discourse, in my opinion, and where you get Muslim scholars pausing and writing quite a bit, is أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. Isn't Allah the best of judges? Because, so for instance, I'll just read it in Arabic first. In Al-Razi, I believe this is Al-Razi, although it might, I didn't bring any tafsirs with me, so I might have copied it from Al-Taridi. It doesn't matter. It says, أحكم الحاكمين يعني قضاء بالحق والعدل بين الخلق وفيه مضمر محذوف وتقديره فلما ينكرون مع هذا الحال البعث والجزاء, and so on and so forth. So, saying that, isn't the fact that Allah entitled you to a state of dignity, a state of beauty, gave you that perfected state of beauty, and gave you the potential to protect it and develop it, but also gave you the choice to allow it to deteriorate, where nothing remains or very little remains of that state of dignity and beauty and enlightenment. Wouldn't a truly remarkable creator, wouldn't only a truly remarkable creator do this, create this? A creator that basically allowed you as human beings to share the attributes of divinity. The Ahl al-Zahir, because we always go to the literalist school, said, well, Ahkam al-Hakimin means that those who honor God in their faith and their good deeds, in the hereafter, Allah is the perfect judge, Allah is the most just judge. You will get your rewards, your dues in a perfect measurement. Nothing will be overlooked, nothing will be forgotten. Beyond Ahl al-Zahir, beyond the literalist school, is where you get a great deal of material that says, no, if you truly reflect upon what Surah Al-Tin is telling you, it's very similar to Surah Al-Asr in a sense. Very similar to Surah Al-Asr. And go back to like tafsir on Surah Al-Asr, because I refer to a lot of the different schools of thought there as well. That when this surah enters your heart, and this is what I was talking about earlier, you no longer intellectually understand Ahkam al-Hakimin, the most wise of judges, but you actually, in a flash of enlightenment, tajalli, your heart opens up to it, and the secret of creation, the purpose of creation, opens up to you. And this is why Surah Al-Tin, by the way, it was a part of the dhikr, reportedly, it was a part of the dhikr of the Sahaba, that, according to the reports, is that the Sahaba would sit and recite it, and when they get to Alaysa Allah b'ahkam al-hakimin, they would all respond. Yeah, so they would all affirm, yes, Allah is ahkam al-hakimin. And in a lot of Sufi zikr circles, Surah Al-Tin is used for this purpose. We all read Ahkam al-Hakimin, and for many years as I was growing up, you just recite Surah Al-Tin and Ahkam al-Hakimin, you don't feel it. But once you feel it in your heart, the أحسن تقويم and أسفل السافلين and أحكم الحاكمين, it's as if you're seeing vision. And that vision prevents you from saying, why did Allah create me? Why am I here? Once you receive that vision, you never ask that question again, because it seems like a very silly and stupid question. Okay, that's Surah Al-Tin. Alhamdulillah.
Did I? Yeah, that's number 7.
Did I miss something?
Number 7.
Which is what?
Oh, what then will make you deny religion?
Oh.
فما يكذبك بعد.
But for my because of so, yeah, sorry. I prematurely said that. That's
We
for
haven't
my
been sleeping much in our house.
it's been a stressful week. For my so how can you deny, and the only thing, thank you for reminding me. For my two things about the deen. The literature said, so how can you deny religion? The religion of Islam, which is the religion of all the prophets from Ibrahim to Moses to Isa, that's the religion. The religion is the religion of Islam, up to the religion of Muhammad. But beyond the second level of tafsir said, deen doesn't just refer to Islam, but it also refers to a moral point, and that is ad-dayn, your indebtedness. So how can you after that deny your gratitude to the one who made you, endowed you with these innate attributes of dignity, and gave you the freedom to either develop your innate attributes or to do otherwise? That it's an ethical failure to deny your indebtedness or your gratitude for that legacy, that treasure of accountability and also liability at the same time. It's sort of like, I've trusted you with a great responsibility. Now, if you're a loser, you'd say, well, who told you I want to be responsible for anything? Leave me alone. I don't want to be responsible. That's a loser response. If you're not a loser, you'd say, sure, I'll take it on. Give me the responsibility. I'm for it. I'm up to it. Which is reflected in real life. There are losers and there are winners, as there are in response to Allah's trust that Allah has given us. The most the narrative in the Quran, which comes in a sort of persistent theme of the innate dignity recognized as inherent in human beings, there is a very interesting book called. It was published by Brill. It was originally a PhD dissertation. It's about the impact of Ibn Tufayl and philosophers like Ibn Aqil and Ibn Tufayl on the natural law tradition in Europe.
That sounds like an awesome book.
Huh?
That sounds like an awesome book.
Yeah, if you don't mind me, I'll write down the title for because I actually have it in Thousand Tones. I've gone back to it several times, but basically what I want to tell you about is that there were a number of Muslim thinkers who took that message of the inherent dignity of human beings. That human beings were created as dignified creatures, entitled to dignity. And they laid the seed for a naturalistic philosophy. A naturalistic philosophy meaning that by the state of nature, created by God, human beings are entitled to dignity, and you can't take that dignity away from them. And it features very heavily in philosophers like Ibn Aqil, his Kitab al-Funun, and in Ibn Tufail's famous story about what became the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe, the man on the island who realizes that he's entitled to dignity by the innate state of things because God created him this way, and starts thinking about the role of law, the role of society, and so on. And what this book discusses is that how these Muslim philosophers inspired British natural law philosophers that then developed into the natural rights tradition. And the natural rights tradition is the genesis for the human rights tradition. So, and it's a fascinating study, and if Muslims weren't such losers, that study would have become not published by Brill, where the book costs $350. You know, it's $350. But if Muslims would have taken a book like that and republished it, where it would cost $20, and supported it and backed it up, that evidence that it was the Quran influencing Muslim intellectuals, Muslims intellectuals then influenced the natural law tradition in Europe, who then influenced, and by the way, that influenced the Reformation, the birth of Protestant Christianity. And the natural law tradition then influenced the natural rights tradition, and the natural rights tradition then influenced the human rights tradition. And so when you hear, because these days you hear Muslims say this all the time on public media, all of them, of course, are people who love despots and love dictators. What does Islam have to do with a human rights tradition? A human rights tradition, all of human rights are just Western nonsense, and we don't want human rights, and we love to be tortured and abused and killed, and we just love this stuff. Please do it to us. Of course, the people who are always saying that are the people who are close to the government and always safe and secure, and nothing will ever touch them. But in reality, that type of discourse is a direct affront to the message of the Quran. Because the Quran itself is the one that reminds us that we human beings are entitled to the divine attributes, and the divine attributes entitle us to a state of dignity that no one has the right to take away from us. Okay, I haven't missed anything this time, right?
Actually, I have another question.
But before we get to questions, have I missed any?
Yeah, have you covered the إِلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُم أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ
Yeah,
مَمْنُونٍ?
you did miss the فَلَهُم أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ
Okay.
Sorry, that's okay.
Going home, or we're gonna go.
Yeah, but we can.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay.
فَلَهُم أَجْرٌ
Yeah. So, sorry not to.
No. Again, it's we need to do it. So, yeah. So the part that Amanda, read the part that I missed again. So this is وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. I said وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, but I didn't do it.
6.
6?
It's like
Okay.
the second part of
The last
6.
part.
Like that's part 6.
So I'm going to say all of 6.
Yeah.
But those who believe and do good deeds. And then 7 is, will have an unfailing reward.
Yeah.
All right?
So So the غَيْرُ مَمْنُون. And again, thank you for because it is important. Translating it as they will have their due reward is the zahir meaning. It's a literal meaning. But mamnoon comes from the word manna. And manshi is, how do you translate that? Is when you reward something, but you hold a person, you take away from a person's dignity for giving them that reward. And men is when you say, you give someone something and you say, oh, aren't you happy I gave it to you? Don't you feel good now that, you know, I instead of being a poor, starving, miserable soul, now, thanks to me, you have food? What is the word? How do you translate it?
Like
Condescending.
condescending, kind of like.
It's degrading someone, or you know, reminding someone.
Yeah, patronizing. That's what
Patronizing, reminding someone of the good you give them. So what's beautiful here is that yes, they will have their due reward, but غير ممنون is that even in Allah rewarding them, their dignity will not be taken away. So many commentators, other than the Ahl al-Zahir, the literalist people, and especially the Jilani has a very nice passage about that when Allah rewards, Allah doesn't belittle you. And he says that in this is Allah teaching human beings that the hasana, and the sadaqah, the good deed you do, when you do salihat, it should never belittle or degrade a human being. Because Allah's self, when Allah rewards us for our good deeds, Allah will do it in such a way that will not take away from the dignity that Allah has endowed us with. It's a very nice lefta. It's a very nice observation. And of course it goes, because the Quran says, Allah tells us that if you are going to give sadaqah and belittle someone, give them a charity, and belittle them and degrade them, Allah tells you not giving is better. Because dignity is more important. So it is incredible that Allah Himself told us that when Allah rewards us, it will be in a way that is not belittling to our dignity. So how about other human beings? And of course, if Muslims would have developed this into our modern thinking, they would have developed it in a way in which the social morality of social welfare is not done in a way that is degrading to the other or belittling to the other.
So kind of like how when sycophants get like rewarded, but not like, basically not like that. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's blading them in?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool.
That's the man shit is really when you hold it over someone and say, you know.
Is like the backup safety to that is giving anonymously.
Yeah.
That word.
Yeah. I mean, of course, that's why it's beautiful to give anonymously, because one is not left beholden. But if one translates it into a social philosophy, it could become quite powerful, because you would structure. I mean, right now, I'll tell you that like I take Egyptian culture. When rich people give, they go to poor areas in Egypt and they give the hasana. It's embedded part of the culture that the person receiving whatever the becomes thoroughly degraded. In fact, treats the giver like God. The amount of profuse praise and dua and it is part of like the culture that the giver feels very superior and expects to feel superior.
Yeah.
And if they would have listened to the ethics of the Quran, that wouldn't be. Because if Allah this is not befitting for the divine, how can it be befitting for human beings? So it is an important point that again I overlooked. So
just about the culture, you were saying, Sheikh Khaled, about how in Egypt, when people give, I was just thinking similarly in Syria, when someone does some good to you, I mean, some people, and this is again incorporated into the culture, you would say, "Ana mamnoon ilak."
yeah,
So,
which is, you know,
mamnooneen ilak.
English translation.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's using the same word of I'm basically I'm taking away from my dignity and thanks to you, what you've done.
What Allah says, no mamnoon, غير mamnoon. Allah is, you know, that reward doesn't have the element of taking away from dignity. Well, in the culture, it says, you know,
It's backwards.
yeah, it's backwards. It's like they're saying, no, I am mamnoon.
This is like really mind-blowing. Like, it's such a common phrase.
Yeah, it is really. I'm just, you know, in Egypt, it has become like all the wealthy people, or all the people who are well off, when they with few exceptions, of course, when they go into poor areas like the shanty towns, and they give. It's just such a performance of humiliation, and it's very ugly, very very ugly, and it's completely inconsistent with Quranic ethics and the dignifying of human beings.
And that in Arabic is called mamnoon. That's what that is?
Men is the root.
Men, okay.
Yeah, men is the root. And
Okay.
minna
Minna.
is
Okay.
the... Okay, alhamdulillah. So, is it Maghrib yet?
No.
No. Still like 30 minutes or so.
Okay, so we can do, if there's a Q&A, then we can do that.